Black Clover has a reputation in the greater manga community for having consistently bad villains, with many claiming that there is not a single compelling villain in the entire series. Though I think that complaint goes a bit too far, as I believe Patry is an incredibly well-written villain. Just because he eventually became a good guy does not take away from the fact that he was once a villain and that he was a damn good one. Also, I just don't see how we can consider Veto a bad villain. He's probably the most underrated villain or even character in the entire series. And Lucius Sagratis, people are shooting their anti-Black Clover shots a bit too early with him. I think he's going to go down as the best villain in the series by far. I think people just don't really realize that we've only had 38 chapters of Lucius Sagratis. Because of all of Black Clover's breaks, that's why it seems like it's developing really slow. I think he's going to go down as the best villain in the series by far. But there are some stinkers that Tabata has written. I did a video on Morris over a year ago now, and I've wanted to finally do one on who I believe to be Black Clover's worst villain. That is the King of Devils, the evil god of gravity, Lucifero, as I believe that the hype of his introduction was part of what led to his ultimate downfall. I do want to clarify here what I mean by worst villain. I mean as in he is the worst big bad or final villain of an entire arc type of character. Obviously, we list off every single named villain in the entire series. He's not gonna be the worst. Any Dark Disciple is gonna be a worse character than Lucifero, but he is the worst villain proportional to what he should and could have been as a final villain. Now, obviously, I don't think it needs to be stated that I love Black Clover. It is literally my favorite manga of all time. Just because I want to make a video criticizing a single character, and it doesn't mean I am doing it with malintent. And I do want to say that Tabata actually did a lot of great writing in Buildup for Lucifero. We do need to remember that Tabata was incredibly rushed and unhealthy at the time of writing the Spade Saga, which is what led to the first 3-month hiatus, with the conclusion in chapter 331. I want to remind everybody how hard it would be to write a story on a weekly basis, while also doing the art for it. And the blunder that I think he had is something that could easily be fixed in the anime adaptation. As I've been told, Bleach's 1000-Year Blood War anime has changed some things about the manga that Kubo wanted to be switched up to match his original vision. Hopefully, when the Black Clover anime comes back, which I have heard credible sources state that it'll be back at the end of 2024, or possibly the beginning of 2025, then I really hope Tabata does make some fixes with Lucifero. Some of those things I hope he changes I will address later in the video. So first, I want to start off by going over the history of Lucifero, how he was introduced and built up throughout the series before his regrettable downfall. The funny thing is that us Black Clover fans knew that Lucifero was likely going to be a character for years, as back in chapter 36 we got to see a major piece that revolved around the plans of the Eye of the Midnight Sun, the main antagonist group for the series at that point. That piece was this stone tablet that housed weird designs on its surface. These were the engravings of the Sephirah. The Sephirah is a concept from Kabbalism or Jewish mythology, as well as esotericism and the centuries that followed. This is a grouping of angels mapped to different parts of the Tree of Life. Now, how does this holy and angelic symbol relate to Lucifero? Well, that's because if you have the Sephirah and the Tree of Life, that implies the Tree of Qliphoth, that it must be a thing as well. And who's on top, or I guess in this case, the bottom of the Tree of Qliphoth? Well, it's Lucifer in most interpretations of the myth, or Satan. But in Black Clover, Lucifero has two names, Lucifero and Satan. So this is one of the main reasons why a lot of Black Clover fans believe that Lucifero would eventually be a character in the series, and probably a final villain. Obviously, they went with the name Lucifer, not Lucifero, but Lucifero is just the Italian translation for Lucifer. But this symbol being a major part of the Eye of the Midnight Sun's plan was foreshadowing for Lucifero being a character in the series. The idea of a presence of a king of demons or king of devils was a concept that we had expected since the very beginning. This would get further support towards the end of the Elf Saga with the arrival of the word Devil Zagrid. He would make a few statements that would imply that there were ranks amongst devils, as he reminded Libe to keep his place in the pecking order. It wouldn't be that much longer when we would meet the Dark Triad, the family of devil hosts. Once we saw Dante, it was actually foreshadowed pretty early on that he was going to be the host of Lucifero, as he had a linked star symbol engraved into his forehead. Lucifer in mythology has a lot of star symbolism. I mean, he is often referred to as the morning star. Also, we know that he likely had gravity powers even before it was revealed, because the symbol on his head is the same as Haiji's and Hungry Joker, which is Tabata's previous manga, and he was a gravity user as well. The gravity of a star being one of its most important things about it, as that is how it keeps its own domain, the solar system, in check. Needless to say that this was foreshadowing that a lot of people picked up on. But once Dante finally revealed the name of one of his spells, Presence of the Demon King, we all knew that this dude must have been contracted to Lucifero, and that would be confirmed a few chapters later in chapter 243. Dante, impressed by Asta's berserk power, sought counsel with the King of Devils, wondering who he was. While this interaction is only about 1.5 pages long, it was actually pretty intimidating and built up a lot of hype. While Lucifero admits that he doesn't know who this anti-magic devil is, and he says it cannot be Zagrid, who left the underworld, what he says about Asta's berserk form is pretty terrifying in retrospect. With a stopgap power like erasing spells, it's probably a low-ranking nobody with paltry magic. Now, obviously, he was wrong about Asta's potential being that weak, but the fact that he saw this and just wasn't impressed did a pretty good job of building up Lucifero, that he would be an incredibly powerful threat if he thought that anti-magic was not that impressive. Not only that, but Tabata does a good job with visual storytelling to display Lucifero's power. At this point, we had only seen devils with 2 horns and 2 wings. Lucifero has 4 horns and 4 wings. While there was no direct statement in the series at this time that having more of these would make you stronger, it did seem obvious. But I'd say it was always implied because we know that the more devil power a host used, the larger and more developed their horns and wings get. Which could then mean that Lucifero isn't strong because he has 4 wings and 4 horns, but rather he has 4 horns and 4 wings because he is that strong. He is filled to the brim with unending negative mana. Tabata would continue to build up the idea of Lucifero being a future villain, as Dante would reveal to Yami that his plan was to kidnap both Yami and William because the combination of their world tree and dark magic allows for a ritual that summons and opens the Tree of Qliphoth, bringing devils into the living world. This was a callback to when Dorothy was explaining to Noelle that devils are not allowed into the living world and they must be summoned in contracts. This also gives us the idea that if Dante is successful, that means that Lucifero could possibly be the villain in the near future, which would become a very close reality, as though Dante would be defeated by one of the greatest 1-2 combos with Devil Arm Asta and Yami. Zenon was successful in his capture of William Vengeance, and he had enough power left to take on the stamina-deprived Asta and Yami, stealing the Renegade Captain and heading back to the Spade Kingdom to form the ritual. This also ended the first arc of the Spade Saga, the Joint Struggle arc. Now before we move on to the next arc, the Spade Raid arc, I want to give Tabata credit in foreshadowing how strong Lucifero was when it came to true devil power. At the time, a lot of people didn't think that Dante would be that much weaker than Lucifero once he used 80% devil power. Because if you think about it, that would mean that he has 80% of Lucifero's power, plus his own power, and then all that power being augmented by his grimoire, which Lucifero does not have. But Tabata showed us that devil power that isn't channeled directly is far weaker than when it is. When Asta was given Libe's power through the sword, it's far weaker than when he's given the power directly, as proven by Devil Arm Asta having far less visible anti-magic than Berserk Asta, but because it was channeled directly through him, he was far stronger than Berserk Asta. Whereas Lucifero is giving them power in a completely different universe back in the underworld. This is proven later in the Spade Saga when Vanica, Megicula's host, goes to 100% devil power and is still far weaker than Megicula, who is only 1/3 manifested. Anyways, going into this next arc, most Black Clover fans actually believed that Lucifero was not going to be the final villain, but it would slowly continue to build up even from just the very beginning of the arc, as during the captain's meeting, Noct would unveil everything that he knew about the plans of the Dark Triad and began to describe what would happen. In 7 days, the Tree of Qliphoth will open. The Tree of Qliphoth is made up of 7 layers throughout Hell, and 10 devils are mapped to it. It is stated that even the weakest devils are as strong as the Dark Triad, and that the lower the devil on the tree, the stronger they are, giving us more evidence that yeah, Lucifero is going to be built very different from any devil we have seen up to that point. When Asta went to train with Noct to learn to master his devil powers, he would end up fighting the anti-magic devil himself, Libe. During this fight, Libe would recognize Asta and find him familiar to Lashita, Asta's mother, who found him when he was thrown through the gate and landed in the living world. She took care of him and raised him as her son until one day, Lucifero took possession of Libe's body in order to manifest into the living world. In full control of Libe's body, Lucifero would kill Lashita, but not before she defeated him with her mana drain condition. This moment in the story was momentous for various reasons, as it shows that Lucifero can just take over lower devils who find their way into the living world. Also, it shows that Lucifero isn't just some statue-like schmuck while he is contracted to Dante. No, he can still do his own things while Dante is running around the living world using his power. This also finalized a plot point. The first arc of the Spade Saga really was the Dark Triad versus the Light Triad, and every triad had a connection to each other. Vanica was contracted to Megicula, who killed Astier. Zenon was the one who hunted down Yuno when he was a baby, and now we know that Dante's devil was the one connected to Asta because he killed Asta's mom. It also sets in motion a whole lot of events for the series, as it was this Lucifero encounter that even led to Libe being sealed inside of the grimoire and manifesting anti-magic powers, making this one of the most important moments in the entire series and it was Lucifero's doing. It would be a while until we would get more information on Lucifero, but we would be aware of his possible presence during the Spade raid when the first gate actually opened. We were met with the twin devils, Lilith of devil ice magic and Nama of devil fire magic. The twins, once manifested initially, wanted to play with Dante and his newfound 100% devil power, but they thought it would get messy if they interfered with Lucifero, so they stayed away. But the display of power by the twins was something that we all took note of, because Lucifero was going to be far stronger than them. Despite only playing and holding back their magic, their power was on a whole other level than the 80% Dark Triad. Not only that, but they did some crazy things like burning invisible concept and destroying a dimension made by Noct that contained no light, life, or death. Another very peculiar thing happened with Lucifero shortly before this, that being that he was also contracted to the sorcery scientist Morris at the same time as Dante, showing that he can form contracts with at least 2 people at once. This reveals a few things about Lucifero, one being that he's a master manipulator. He forms one contract with Dante to form a pawn that is just a powerhouse. Then he takes on Morris and uses his special abilities and knowledge to help him manifest into the living world. It is then revealed that thanks to Morris, Lucifero found a way to manifest early. All he needed was the second gate to open. Lucifero even points out that Megicula thought she had outfoxed him, but all he saw the conniving Megicula as was a good lab rat. With Morris defeated, the pawn lasted just long enough for the second gate to open, and with the connection to the underworld deepening, Lucifero was able to manifest inside of the lower devils in the living world, similar to what he did with Libe. He would then take the remaining devils from the first 2 gates and fused all of them into a massive monster. Not only did he fuse with these devils, but also the Tree of Qliphoth itself. Lucifero's larval form began to grow larger and stronger with each passing moment. Even the combo spell Curse Worker's Neighbor could only slow down its growth, not even stall his power, let alone weaken him. Lucifero's larval form would be stopped by Asta's Infinite Slash, halting his full manifestation into the living world. While as readers we thought this was the end of the Spade saga, with Lucifero's manifestation stopped, and he would be the final villain later on, we would be surprised to see that Asta and co did not defeat Lucifero fast enough, and he actually was able to half manifest into the living world. Lucifero would quickly display what he was all about, telling the onlookers that their heads were all raised a little too high, and so he activated his gravity magic that forced everyone into a full-on grovel. He would blitz toward Asta, and the first round of their fight would ensue. Asta would go Devil Union until he could fight through the gravity. With a full force swing of his Demon Slayer sword, Asta would be surprised that Lucifero would easily catch it, and when he investigated the power of the blade, Lucifero pressed his finger and drew some blood, enraging the Demon King. Lucifero would punch Asta so hard that his eyes could not even focus, and this is where it stated that Lucifero has incredibly high physical strength, not just high magic power. And Asta would have been done for at this moment if not for the Clover Captains intervening. Charlotte, Jack, Dorothy, Merliona, Fagolion, and Nozel would all attempt to fight Lucifero, with all of them being amped and protected by Rill's Twilight Valhalla. They fought with no success, all of their attacks meaningless, and only worked to slow down Lucifero so that they could barely save Asta. But ultimately, it would take the arrival of the Prince of Stars to save Asta one last time. Yuno would go full spirit dive and team up with Hellfire, Merliona to fight Lucifero. Eventually, Lucifero recognized their strength and potential that they had to kill him. And with the arrival of Yami into the battle, him and Noct's combo spell would force Lucifero to finally use his full 50% power, showing us what looked to be his true form. Before, Lucifero's skin was all wrinkly, now it was smoother and his shoulders spiked up, as well as possessing a third eye on his forehead. With Lucifero's full 50% power, he pretty easily mollywopped the 4-man squad of Asta, Yuno, Noct, and Yami. At the end of the battle, it took for Asta and Liba to heighten their resonance and form a true Devil Union. This power was enough to significantly wound Lucifero, but they would defuse before they could finish him off. Luckily for Asta, Noct and Yami had not given up yet, and they decided to help him more, and Yuno added one last star teleportation as well, and they finally finished off the King of Devils. That's pretty much the conclusion of Lucifero in the Spade Saga. We do later see him in the final saga for a couple of panels, but that's after Lucius had defeated him and absorbed the rest of him. Now, there are a lot of significant issues I have with Lucifero. Don't get me wrong, I do think that Tabata did put in some significant work in building him up over the course of the Spade Saga. But that was ultimately the downfall for him as a good villain. One of the things that really irked me about Lucifero was his attitude once he manifested. Remember that Lucifero is built up as a villain that was conniving and calculated. He contracted 2 different characters and considered the incredibly smart Morris as just one of his pawns. Megicula, who is also incredibly smart, could not outfox Lucifero. He was completely in the know of her plan. Not only that, but he had come up with a plan of his own and to manifest early. But we see none of this when he's actually in the living world. No planning. Instead, he gets outsmarted on numerous occasions. He can teleport, we know this, but the captains outsmart him and teleport Asta away before he can get him and kill him. If this was such an important thing for him to do, why didn't he teleport as well? Even worse is that we know that it was Lucifero, the king of devils, that was directly outsmarted by Adramelech. Lucifero was able to root out Megicula's plans, but not Adramelech's, even though Adramelech literally disobeyed him to his face when he was fighting Yuno and Mirliona, who were protecting Asta. I get that he was focused in battle at this point, but really, Lucifero, a devil who is well beneath you, is blatantly ignoring your orders, and you cannot figure out that he's not on your side? Not only that, but Adramelech warned the Clover forces as you were manifesting Lucifero. Again, great build-up for Lucifero, but such a stark contrast from what he was foreshadowed to be when he actually came into play. Another thing for me was Lucifero's attitude. He was a whiny, ornery brat. We basically get nothing explaining why Lucifero acts like this so quickly. Instead of the calm but evil presence he was built up to be, he acted like a man-child whose mother didn't cook his chicken tendies the exact way he wanted them to be. I've seen a lot of people try and defend Lucifero by saying, well, what do you expect? He's a devil. He's a beast. Of course he's going to be acting like this and not be very smart. But as I said, and I showed, Lucifero was both a looking forward and planning type of villain who's outsmarting other characters that were very smart, like Megicula. Megicula herself is an example of a devil not being a mindless beast. She formed a plan to manifest into the living world. She also created curses. If we look at how her magic works, she created runes to form her spells, actually showing that she probably has to put more of a thought into creating these complex spells than other characters. Adramelech is obviously not mindless. He helped overthrow Lucifero. Zagrid, a devil a whole rank below Lucifero, had a 500-year plan to gain a body and a 5-leaf clover grimoire, and it worked. He just died before he could really use them. Xenon became a devil, and he still had a mind to him. Even the mid-ranked devils that are contracted and knocked have a mind to them. Libe is a devil, but obviously, he is very human-like when it comes to his mind and thoughts. Hence why I've never understood or really respected this defense to Lucifero of why he acted like this, especially when almost the entire source material rejects that this should have been the case. And remember, Lucifero was supposed to be someone who was knowledgeable, but we don't really get that. And this leads to another thing. Lucifero, the king of devils, the evil god of gravity, produces virtually no magical proficiency. The only things that he does with his gravity magic is reinforcing his physical punches. He imitates presence of the Demon King by increasing the gravity in the area around him, and focusing gravity so much that he can warp space to teleport. That is just boring. Like, I understand that Tabata is probably going for something like having a physically strong character that threw punches as being a big threat to Asta because Asta can't negate physical punches, but he could have done both. That would have been an even greater thing to see. Dante should be far less proficient with the use of his gravity magic than Lucifero. He's doing things like creating gravitational singularities or forming gravity in a way to forge blades that he can use to fight with. Do you agree it would have been cooler to see something like Lucifero creating a sword out of the castle, or even creating a sword out of some of the devils that he fused with and then warps gravity around it, so it's like a gravity cutting sword? But no, we just get punches and kicks. And there was another defense to this criticism like the other one, and that is that people say, well, Lucifero, he only had half of his power and he had no grimoire. Therefore, it makes sense as to why he did not do any spells. I understand this. And if you just look at the Black Clover power system in a very basic way, you can say that's true. But Tabata has provided numerous examples of characters doing very complex spells without the grimoire. It is stated in the Q&A by Tabata that characters can do spells without a grimoire. It's just the more complex it is, the harder it is to do. Yuno has produced tornadoes without a grimoire, which that's more complex than just wind itself. But we're talking about the king of devils here. And if we look at other characters, Licht, without a grimoire, was able to do ultimate magic. Ultimate magic literally being the ultimate or highest spell a mage can possibly do. Patru, without a grimoire, was able to do even his most powerful spell, Ray of Divine Punishment. Even Patru can do ultimate magic without a grimoire. Not only that, but there was an expectation built up about demon runes. We knew that the demon language was inside of Asta's grimoire when he summoned the swords, and with the introduction of the mana method power system in the Heart Kingdom, where they use runes to form arrays to create powerful spells and abilities, Well, if Lucifero is the king of devils, and we see Megicula using these demon runes all the time, well, there was an expectation built up that Lucifero would be able to do this as well. And let's say, even if he didn't have a grimoire, he could have done spells by using his own runic arrays. Besides, there was a lot of speculation that Lucifero would get a grimoire when he manifested anyways. Now, it seems like 5-leaf clover grimoires do not die along with their owners, because when Lick died, that was before his grimoire was taken by Zagrid, but the grimoire stayed behind and later became Asta's. Zagrid had a 5-leaf clover grimoire that he took from Patri. We didn't see where that grimoire went. Likely, it was left behind in the Shadow Palace, which is the border between the living world and the underworld, which means it is now closer to Lucifero, and if Lucifero is fused with the Tree of Cliffoff, then he should be able to travel to the Shadow Palace and get that grimoire. Either way, we've seen characters without grimoires perform spells, even incredibly complex spells like ultimate magic. There was no actual excuse for Lucifero being such a boring character when it came to his fighting style. The punching and kicking was great for a couple of chapters, but it would have been a lot better if he started to rely on his gravity powers a bit more, especially if he created something like a gravity sword. I mean, Asta's a swordsman. Making Lucifero a swordsman really matches that. And it would have been even great for the symbolism of what the Tree of Life and the Tree of Cliffoff are supposed to be. The Tree of Cliffoff is supposed to shadow the Tree of Life. Licht is the same position on the Tree of Life that Lucifero is on the Tree of Cliffoff. Lucifero being a swordsman would have even matched that symbolism even more. But something that I also find almost unforgivable is that Lucifero, the king of devils, provided almost zero lore or history of either the living world or the underworld. There are so many questions in Black Clover. What are the gods, or who is God? What is the origin of the devils, or the underworld? Why are the devils sealed away by the Tree of Cliffoff, and who did that? What is the origin of grimoires? And I don't think anybody is saying that Lucifero needed to answer all of these questions. In fact, he didn't even need to answer any of them fully. A partial answer to a few of them, I think, would have been great. This is something that usually happens when a final villain arrives. They give you something in the form of information. We know from Lilith and Nama they have been trapped in the underworld for centuries. And the Heart Queen knowledge goes back 1200 years, and that's where Lolo got the knowledge of the Tree of Cliffoff. Meaning that Lucifero could be over 1200 years old, which should give him so much wisdom of the Black Clover multiverse. But we get absolutely nothing. We learn nothing about devils, we learn nothing about why he is the Devil King, nothing about the Tree of Cliffoff, and nothing about the other gods. I was a weekly reader during Lucifero's manifestation, and I remember distinctly how much of the fandom wanted to know more about the Black Clover world, and Lucifero was the perfect conduit to do that. No history, no lore, just one big disappointment. If we go back to Lucifero and see what he actually provided to the series, it's really not that great, at least when it comes to his manifestation. Sure, he's the character that killed Asta's mother, and basically is what caused Libe to be sealed inside the grimoire and create anti-magic, but beyond that, he manifests as a massive monster, gets defeated, manifests anyways, beats the shit out of Asta, beats the shit out of the captains, and finally, after Mereoleona, Yami, and Noct show him that humans can be a threat, he goes full power, only to eventually be defeated by True Devil Union Asta. He accomplishes nothing, and is merely a plot device to help Lucius in his own plan. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that Lucifero is like the worst villain ever. He's just the worst major villain in Black Clover, but I wouldn't say he's the worst if you include the minor villains. I will say, Tabata did a good job of foreshadowing his build-up very well. And when he did manifest at first, it was amazing. The first few chapters of Lucifero are actually great. We could feel the weight of his presence in the panels, and the way that characters were reacting. And at first, seeing him fight physically was menacing, because that was rare in the series, and it spelled a disaster for somebody like Asta. And then for Tabata to finish Lucifero off by having Lucius in his base defeat him in an off-screen fight really just kind of shows that Tabata might have never thought of Lucifero in the way that he actually built him up to be in the narrative. Though at least Lucius is already panning out a lot better than Lucifero, and he really has not been around that long, and probably still has a lot more to go to finish it out, but I really do think that Tabata could have made Lucifero a phenomenal villain that still ended up being a pawn of Lucius. I think the argument of, well, this was all Lucius's plan is not a great defense. It really would just take a few simple fixes to make Lucifero a actual pretty good villain. Give Lucifero some crazy spells. Have him act a bit more cold and calculated, like he was built up to be, rather than the ornery mess he was portrayed once manifested. And let him tell us something about the underworld, devils, magic, or anything that has to do with world building or power systems. Or how about this, some backstory on Lucifero himself? We don't know anything about him. If I were to try and make a history of Lucifero video, it could be done realistically in like 3 minutes, and almost all of that would be about his present self. Nothing about his backstory. But what do you guys think? I know that there are a lot of Lucifero fans out there within the Black Clover fandom, but similar to Morris in my Black Clover critique video, I think that Lucifero was a stunning disappointment. With that being said, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. Please tell me your thoughts down below. Leave a like if you did, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications. You can also continue the discussion by joining my Discord and following me on Twitter. Also, if you want to help support the channel and get access to more videos or videos early, you can become a member. Press the join button below. With that being said, hope you guys all have an amazing day. Peace out.